The mansion sprawls across nearly 6 acres in San Jose, California, a Victorian labyrinth of towers, turrets, and inexplicable architectural choices. 160 rooms according to most counts, though the exact number depends on how you define a room. 47 fireplaces, 10,000 windows, 17 chimneys, 2,000 doors, staircases that lead nowhere, doors that open onto brick walls, windows that look into other rooms, a door on the second floor that opens to a straight drop to the garden below. The Winchester Mystery House stands as one of America's most peculiar structures, a monument to wealth, eccentricity, and endless construction. Tour guides lead visitors through twisting hallways and point out the architectural oddities. The stairs with 2-inch rises designed for a woman with arthritis. The spiderweb motifs carved into windows and built into the design. The obsession with the number 13. 13 bathrooms, 13 windows in certain rooms, 13 steps on staircases, 13 hooks in the seance room. The legends are famous. A widow haunted by guilt over deaths caused by her family's rifles. A woman who consulted spirits nightly. A house built according to instructions from the dead. Construction that continued 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 38 years. A mansion designed to confuse vengeful ghosts who sought revenge for lives taken by Winchester rifles. The building has become synonymous with the paranormal. Ghost hunting shows film episodes here. Paranormal investigators bring their equipment. Visitors report strange experiences. The Winchester Mystery House attracts hundreds of thousands of people annually, drawn by stories of America's most haunted mansion and its mysterious owner who built to appease the dead. But before it became a tourist attraction, before the legends crystallized into accepted narrative, before it was known as the most haunted house in America, it was a construction site. A construction site that never stopped building. This is the story of how the Winchester Mystery House came to exist, the fortune that made it possible, the woman who commissioned it, and the workers who built it. The tragedies that preceded it, the construction that defined it, the earthquake that damaged it, the truth behind the legends. The reality is more complex than the ghost stories suggest. Sarah Winchester was a real woman who lived through real tragedy and spent decades building an extraordinary house. Understanding why requires understanding the Winchester fortune, the era she lived in, and the gap between documented history and popular legend. The house exists. The oddities are real. The reasons remain subject to interpretation. If you're interested in the true story of America's most mysterious mansion and the woman who built it, please consider subscribing. I would also love a comment if you have additional insights on the Winchester Mystery House. Let's begin with the fortune that made everything possible. The Winchester Repeating Arms Company transformed American firearms manufacturing and created one of the great industrial fortunes of the 19th century. The company's success made Sarah Winchester's endless construction financially possible. Understanding the house requires understanding the source of the wealth that built it. The Winchester name became synonymous with the American frontier, with westward expansion, with the transformation of warfare and hunting. The rifles bearing that name changed history, and the profits from those changes created the resources that would eventually fund 38 years of continuous construction. Oliver Winchester didn't invent the repeating rifle, but he perfected its manufacture and marketing. Winchester had been a successful shirt manufacturer in New Haven, Connecticut before entering the firearms business. In the 1850s, he invested in the Volcanic Repeating Arms Company, which held patents for a lever-action repeating rifle. The early designs were problematic, suffering from weak ammunition and mechanical unreliability, but Winchester recognized the potential in the basic concept. The company reorganized in 1857 as the New Haven Arms Company with Winchester as principal stockholder. The breakthrough came with Winchester's hiring of Benjamin Tyler Henry, a talented mechanic and designer who had worked at the Robbins and Lawrence Armory. Henry developed an improved lever-action rifle that used metallic rimfire cartridges instead of the unreliable rocket ball ammunition of earlier designs. The Henry rifle, patented in 1860, was a revolutionary weapon. It could fire 16 rounds without reloading, an enormous advantage over single-shot rifles that required reloading after every shot. The Henry rifle saw limited use in the Civil War, primarily purchased by individual soldiers rather than through military contracts. The weapon was expensive, costing around $45 when most rifles cost $15 to $20, but those who could afford it appreciated the firepower advantage. Confederate soldiers reportedly called it that damned Yankee rifle that can be loaded on Sunday and fired all week. The psychological impact of facing soldiers with repeating rifles was substantial, even when actual numbers deployed were relatively small. After the Civil War, Winchester continued developing the design. In 1866, the company became the Winchester Repeating Arms Company. The improved Model 1866, nicknamed the Yellow Boy for its brass receiver, incorporated a loading gate designed by Nelson King that made the rifle more practical. The loading gate allowed cartridges to be inserted from the side while keeping the magazine tube sealed, a significant improvement over the Henry rifle's design. The Model 1873, perhaps the most famous Winchester, earned the designation the gun that won the West. The rifle was reliable, accurate, and powerful enough for most frontier purposes. It chambered the 44-40 cartridge, which became so popular that Colt designed revolvers to use the same ammunition, allowing frontier users to carry one type of cartridge for both rifle and handgun. The company's success was extraordinary. Winchester rifles became standard equipment for settlers, lawmen, outlaws, and soldiers across the American West. Buffalo hunters used them to harvest millions of bison. Cattle ranchers carried them. Native Americans acquired them through trade or capture. The rifles were exported internationally, seeing service in conflicts from South America to Asia. The company expanded production continuously, developing new models for different purposes and markets. By the 1880s, Winchester Repeating Arms was one of America's most successful firearms manufacturers, producing thousands of rifles annually and generating substantial profits that made the Winchester family extraordinarily wealthy. Oliver Winchester died in 1880, but the company continued under family control and continued thriving. His son, William Wirt Winchester, had been groomed to lead the company and take over the family business. William had married Sarah Lockwood Pardee in 1862 during the Civil War. Sarah came from a prominent New Haven family with their own successful business. Her father, Leonard Pardee, was a successful carriage manufacturer whose products were in demand throughout New England. Sarah was educated far beyond what was typical for women of her era, having attended select schools and received instruction in multiple subjects usually reserved for men. She reportedly spoke 4 languages fluently and had particular interest in music and literature. Sarah moved in New Haven society, attended appropriate social functions, and was regarded as intelligent, cultured, and refined. The marriage united 2 successful manufacturing families, combining the Winchester firearms fortune with the Pardee carriage-making success. William worked in the family firearms business, learning the operations and preparing to eventually lead the company. Sarah managed their household according to the expectations of upper-class Victorian women. They lived comfortably in New Haven, participated in social activities appropriate to their status, and had access to wealth that placed them among Connecticut's elite. They moved in the same social circles as Yale professors, successful merchants, and established New England families. Their future appeared secure and promising. Then tragedy struck, not once but twice, in ways that would alter Sarah's life permanently and set her on the path toward the mystery house she would eventually build. In 1866, Sarah gave birth to a daughter, Annie Pardee Winchester. The joy of finally having a child after 4 years of marriage was brief and quickly turned to devastating grief. Annie died in July 1866, approximately 6 weeks after birth. The cause was marasmus, a wasting disease whose precise cause was poorly understood in that era. The term encompassed various conditions that caused infants to fail to thrive and waste away despite feeding attempts. Modern medicine would likely diagnose specific conditions that 19th century doctors lumped together under the marasmus label. Infant mortality was tragically common in the 19th century, with roughly 1 in 5 children dying before their first birthday. But knowledge of statistics didn't diminish parents' grief or make the loss easier to bear. Sarah was devastated by Annie's death. Friends and family noted her profound withdrawal and unrelenting grief. The loss affected her health, both physical and mental. She suffered what would now likely be diagnosed as severe depression. Victorian medicine had limited understanding of psychological trauma and few effective treatments. Sarah was expected to mourn appropriately, then move on with life. But the death of her only child marked her permanently. She and William would have no other children, though whether this was by choice, circumstance, medical inability, following difficult birth, or some combination isn't clearly documented in surviving records. The loss of Annie marked Sarah profoundly, changing her personality and outlook. Friends noted she became more withdrawn, less socially engaged, more focused on private matters than public activities. But life continued, as it must. William remained involved with Winchester Repeating Arms, working in the business and preparing to take greater leadership roles. Sarah managed their home and engaged in the social activities expected of a woman in her position, though with less enthusiasm than before. They had wealth and status and the respect of their community, though the shadow of their daughter's death remained over their household and their lives. 15 years after Annie's death came the second tragedy. In 1881, William contracted pulmonary tuberculosis, the disease then called consumption. Tuberculosis was a leading cause of death in the 19th century, killing more people than any other disease. It was called consumption because it seemed to consume sufferers from within, causing progressive wasting, fever, and ultimately respiratory failure. Treatment options were limited and largely ineffective. Fresh air, rest, and good nutrition were recommended, but offered little real help once the disease advanced. William's health declined through the winter of 1880 and into early 1881. On March 7, 1881, William Wirt Winchester died. He was 43 years old. Sarah was 41, a widow with no children, facing a future suddenly uncertain, empty, and without clear purpose. William's death left Sarah with an extraordinary inheritance that would give her unprecedented freedom, but couldn't compensate for her losses. She received approximately 50% of the Winchester Repeating Arms Company, generating an estimated income of roughly $1,000 per day, an enormous sum in the 1880s. To provide context for just how much money this represented, skilled workers might earn $2 or $3 for a full day's labor. A comfortable middle-class annual income might be $1,000 to $1,500. Sarah's daily income exceeded what most Americans earned in an entire year. She was one of the wealthiest women in America, with financial resources that gave her almost unlimited freedom to do whatever she chose, live wherever she wanted, and pursue any interest without financial constraint. What she chose would become one of American history's most puzzling stories. The wealthy widow who had lost her only child and her husband would leave Connecticut, travel across the entire country to California, and begin construction on a house that would continue building without pause until her death 38 years later. The reasons would be debated, mythologized, sensationalized, and analyzed for over a century without reaching definitive conclusions. Sarah Lockwood Pardee was born on September 1839 in New Haven, Connecticut, into a family that was prosperous and socially prominent in the city. Her father, Leonard Pardee, ran a successful carriage manufacturing business. Her mother, Sarah Burns, came from a respected family. The Pardee household was cultured and valued education highly, unusual for attitudes toward daughters in that era. Sarah received an education that was unusually comprehensive for women of her time, including instruction in multiple languages, mathematics, music, and literature. She reportedly spoke 4 languages fluently: English, French, Spanish, and Italian. This level of education was rare even among wealthy families and suggests parents who valued their daughter's intellectual development beyond the basic accomplishments expected of upper-class young women. Sarah was described by those who knew her as intelligent, cultured, refined, and somewhat reserved in social situations. She was accomplished at piano and reportedly performed at private social gatherings. She was also small in stature, standing approximately 4 feet 10 inches tall, notably short even for an era when average heights were lower than today. She suffered from various health issues from young adulthood, including arthritis that would worsen progressively with age, causing increasing pain and mobility limitations in her later years. Her marriage to William Winchester in September 1862 connected her to one of Connecticut's most successful industrial families at a time when the Winchester Company was on the verge of its greatest success. The wedding occurred during the Civil War, a period when many couples rushed to marry before men went off to war, though William's position in the family business likely exempted him from military service. The couple's social position was secure from the start. They moved in upper-class New Haven society, attended appropriate social functions, and were part of the city's elite circle. Sarah was involved in charitable work and social activities typical for women of her class. She was described as somewhat reserved, but functioned normally within upper-class New Haven society, attending gatherings, participating in church activities, and fulfilling the social obligations expected of someone in her position. Nothing in her early life suggested the eccentricity that would later be attributed to her or the unconventional choices she would eventually make. The deaths of Annie and William transformed Sarah's life completely and irrevocably. By 1881, she was a childless widow with immense wealth and no clear purpose or direction. New Haven held painful memories at every turn. The house she had shared with William reminded her of loss. The social circles they had moved in together were now awkward without him. The graves of her daughter and husband were constant reminders of what she'd lost. Many widows in her position would have remained in familiar surroundings, supported by family and friends, maintaining connections and continuing the life they'd known. Sarah made a different choice, one that would take her 3,000 miles from everything familiar. The legend that developed around Sarah's decision to leave Connecticut involves a Boston medium named Adam Coons, though some versions give different names. According to this story, Sarah consulted Coons after William's death, seeking spiritual comfort or guidance in her grief. The medium supposedly contacted William's spirit and received a message for Sarah. The message was that her family was cursed by the spirits of thousands of people killed by Winchester rifles, Native Americans slaughtered in frontier conflicts, soldiers killed in wars, hunters who died in accidents. All their angry spirits sought revenge on the Winchester family. To appease these vengeful spirits and avoid being claimed by them herself, Sarah must move west and build a house. But the construction must never stop. If the building ceased, the spirits would know the house was finished, would be able to find her, and would claim her life in revenge. This story has become absolutely central to the Winchester Mystery House narrative and is repeated as established fact in most popular accounts. Tour guides repeat it to thousands of visitors annually. Books recount it as the explanation for everything that followed. Television documentaries present it as the key to understanding Sarah's behavior. The tale explains both Sarah's move to California and the endless construction with one dramatic supernatural narrative. It provides simple, clear motivation for otherwise inexplicable behavior. There's only one problem with this story. There's no contemporaneous documentation proving it happened, and the earliest versions of the story appear decades after the events they describe. The medium story appears in various forms, with inconsistent details across different tellings. Some versions name the medium as Adam Coons. Others give different names or no name at all. Some place the consultation in Boston. Others suggest New Haven or New York. The specific instructions from the spirits vary in different retellings. The story seems to appear in print first well after Sarah's death, with the earliest detailed versions emerging in the 1920s and 1930s as the house was being marketed as tourist attraction. During her lifetime, Sarah didn't discuss her motivations publicly with anyone. She was famously private, refused all interview requests, and left no letters or diary entries explaining her decisions. The legend may contain elements of truth, may be entirely fabricated by later marketers and storytellers, or may fall somewhere between fact and fiction. What's documentable from actual historical records is that Sarah left Connecticut sometime in 1884 or 1885, traveled to California, and purchased property in the Santa Clara Valley near San Jose. The reason for this cross-country move remains genuinely unclear. Why California specifically? Sarah had visited the area previously, possibly in the 1870s, though details of earlier trips are scarce in surviving records. Some accounts suggest she had relatives or acquaintances in the region who had relocated there earlier, providing potential social connections in what was still relatively frontier territory. The climate was considerably milder than Connecticut, with warm, dry summers and mild winters, potentially beneficial for her worsening arthritis and overall health. California in the 1880s represented opportunity, new beginnings, and escape from the past. The state was still being settled, growing rapidly, and offered fresh start for those willing to travel across the continent. For a wealthy woman seeking to leave painful memories behind and begin completely new life, the Santa Clara Valley offered appealing possibilities, and Sarah's wealth meant she could settle anywhere she chose without financial constraint. In 1884, Sarah purchased an 8-room farmhouse under construction on approximately 160 acres in San Jose. The exact purchase price isn't clearly documented, but was probably substantial given the size of the property. The land was located in what was then a rural area of orchards and farms several miles from downtown San Jose, though San Jose itself was a growing city serving as the commercial center for the fertile Santa Clara Valley. The existing structure was a conventional farmhouse of the era. Nothing remarkable or unusual. 2 stories, straightforward rectangular plan, basic Victorian farmhouse architecture. What Sarah would do with this modest structure over the next 38 years would be remarkable, unprecedented, and genuinely inexplicable by any conventional measure. Sarah moved into the property in 1884 or early 1885 and immediately began renovations and expansions that went far beyond normal updating or improvement. What started as modest modifications to the existing 8-room farmhouse quickly evolved into something much more ambitious and unconventional. Rooms were added to the original structure. New wings were constructed, extending in multiple directions. The modest farmhouse began growing into something unprecedented, unlike any other residential structure in California or anywhere else. And the construction, once started, never really stopped for the rest of Sarah's life. The construction pattern Sarah established was unusual by any standard and remains unique in American architectural history. There was no master plan, no overall architectural design guiding the work, no blueprints showing what the finished structure should look like. Sarah reportedly met with her foreman regularly, often daily according to workers' accounts, and provided instructions for what should be built next. The directions might specify a new room, an addition to existing space, modifications to something already built, or completely new features. The workers would execute her instructions to the best of their ability, then wait for the next set of directions, which might modify what they just completed or move to an entirely different part of the growing structure. The process was organic, evolving, responsive to Sarah's changing ideas, and completely unconventional by any standards of architecture or construction management. The claim that construction proceeded 24 hours a day, 7 days a week requires careful examination, as it's repeated frequently but difficult to verify completely from historical records. Some accounts from workers and neighbors insist that building continued continuously in shifts, with workers laboring day and night without pause for decades. This makes dramatic narrative and emphasizes the obsessive quality attributed to Sarah's building project. But examining payroll records and other documentation suggests the reality may have been somewhat less dramatic, though still extraordinary. What's certain from multiple sources is that construction was extensive, continuous over decades without any extended breaks, and employed numerous workers consistently year-round. Whether work literally proceeded around the clock every single night, or simply continued steadily during normal working hours with unusual frequency and without seasonal breaks, is less clear from documentary evidence. The continuous nature of the construction over decades is undeniable. The specific claim of 24-hour operations may be embellishment or may be accurate for certain periods. The truth is probably that work was extraordinarily continuous by normal standards, even if not literally without pause. What's undeniable from all historical accounts is that Sarah employed a permanent construction crew throughout her time in San Jose. Carpenters, craftsmen, and laborers worked on the property year-round, decade after decade. When one project finished, another began immediately. The house grew steadily, year after year, with no apparent plan for when construction might be considered complete or what the finished structure should look like. The building became Sarah's project, her purpose, her focus, perhaps her obsession. For 38 years, the sound of hammering and sawing was constant presence on the property. The workforce required for this ongoing construction was substantial and varied in skill levels. Skilled carpenters were absolutely essential for the quality woodwork throughout the house and formed the core of the permanent crew. The interior features intricate wood paneling, carved details, decorative elements, and custom millwork that demanded experienced craftsmen who understood both structural carpentry and finish work. Some of the interior woodwork is genuinely impressive, showing high level of skill and attention to detail. Plasterers created elaborate ceiling designs and decorative moldings that required artistic sense as well as technical ability. Glaziers installed thousands of windows, including expensive Tiffany glass pieces that Sarah ordered from the famous New York studio. Windows featuring elaborate designs that required expert installation. Each trade required specialists who understood their craft thoroughly and could execute complex work to high standards. Sarah reportedly treated her workers well and paid them reliably and fairly, which was notable in an era when labor relations could be exploitative and workers had few protections. The construction workers received steady wages without the uncertainty that characterized most construction employment, which was typically temporary and ended when projects finished. In the late 19th century, steady year-round employment in any field was valuable, and employment that continued for years or even decades was extraordinary. The workers had job security that was almost unheard of in construction trades, where workers typically moved from project to project and faced regular unemployment between jobs. Some workers reportedly remained with Sarah's project for many years, suggesting she was at least a tolerable employer and possibly a genuinely good one who treated her workers with respect and fairness. The work itself must have been peculiar and unlike any other construction project the workers had experienced. Building without a master plan meant workers couldn't anticipate what would be needed next or understand how their current work fit into any larger design. A section built one month might be modified the following month based on Sarah's new instructions. Rooms might be constructed according to one plan, then subdivided or combined as Sarah changed her mind. Doorways might be installed, then blocked up when Sarah decided she wanted a wall instead. The organic, evolving nature of the construction required flexibility, patience, and willingness to adapt to constant changes that would have frustrated workers accustomed to following clear plans toward defined goals. The architectural result of this unprecedented building process was a structure that defied all conventional design principles and created something genuinely unique in residential architecture. The house that emerged from decades of continuous construction without master plan is labyrinthine, confusing, and filled with architectural impossibilities. Staircases were built that rose towards ceilings with nowhere to go, so they simply ended at blank walls or ceilings, leading nowhere. Doors were installed in walls that opened onto other walls just inches away, completely non-functional and apparently pointless. Other doors opened onto sheer drops of 10 or 15 feet to the ground below. Dangerous and inexplicable. Windows were placed in interior walls, looking from one room into another rather than to the outside, serving no apparent purpose for light or ventilation. Hallways twisted and turned without apparent logic, sometimes doubling back on themselves or creating paths that seemed to go in circles. The layout became genuinely labyrinthine, difficult to navigate without a guide even for people who visited multiple times. Some oddities resulted directly from the devastating 1906 earthquake that struck San Francisco and the surrounding region on April 18, 1906. San Francisco's Great Earthquake, measuring approximately 7.9 on the modern Richter scale, was felt intensely throughout the Bay Area, including San Jose, about 50 miles south of San Francisco. The Winchester house sustained significant damage in the intense shaking. A 7-story tower that had been visible landmark collapsed completely, crashing down through lower floors. Walls cracked throughout the structure. Multiple chimneys fell, some crashing through roofs. Windows shattered. The damage was extensive enough that some entire sections of the house were rendered unusable or structurally unstable and had to be sealed off permanently. Sarah's response to the earthquake damage was entirely characteristic of her approach to the house and reveals much about her thinking. Rather than simply repair what was broken and restore the house to its pre-earthquake condition, she incorporated changes and used the damage as opportunity for modifications. Damaged sections were sometimes sealed off rather than repaired, with doorways bricked up and entire wings abandoned. The collapsed 7-story tower was not rebuilt, apparently convincing Sarah that building too high was dangerous in earthquake-prone California. The house was never again built as tall as it had been before the earthquake. Some historians suggest Sarah interpreted the earthquake as spiritual message, while others note she simply responded practically to structural reality. The earthquake gave Sarah opportunity to modify, to build differently, to create new configurations. What might have been pure disaster became opportunity for further construction and change. The house that existed before April 1906 was significantly different from the house that emerged from the post-earthquake repairs and modifications. Other architectural oddities beyond those caused by earthquake damage may have resulted from simple experimentation and Sarah's genuine curiosity about design and construction. Sarah had wealth, time, and apparently genuine interest in building and design problems, not just in having a house built, but in the actual process of construction. She held patents for innovations including improvements to window locks that made them easier to operate, demonstrating she was not simply wealthy eccentric, but someone genuinely interested in mechanical and architectural problems. Some strange features might represent experiments, attempts to solve problems, or simply curiosity about what would happen if something was built in an unusual way. A door that opens to nowhere might have been intended as a window that was changed during construction. A staircase to ceiling might have been planned to reach a higher floor that was never built. Some oddities might be simple mistakes that Sarah decided to keep rather than demolish and rebuild. The famous stairs with 2-inch rises, far smaller than standard stair dimensions, are often attributed to Sarah's worsening arthritis, and this explanation seems genuinely plausible based on documented facts about her health. Standard stair rises are typically 7 to 8 inches, requiring significant effort to lift legs and body weight vertically. Stairs with 2-inch rises require many more steps to climb the same vertical distance, but each individual step requires minimal vertical effort. For someone suffering from painful arthritis in knees and hips, such stairs might be considerably easier to navigate than conventional designs, despite requiring more steps. This represents practical problem solving based on personal physical limitations rather than spiritual instruction or pure eccentricity. The spiderweb motifs that appear throughout the house in windows, on doors, in architectural details, in floor designs are documented, visible, and undeniable. Some observers and tour guides interpret these as having spiritual significance, suggesting Sarah believed spiderwebs could trap evil spirits or represented communication with the dead. Others note that spiderwebs were fashionable Art Nouveau design elements in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, appearing in jewelry, metalwork, and architectural decoration as symbols of delicacy and natural beauty. The famous Tiffany Company, from which Sarah ordered glass windows, frequently used spiderweb motifs in their designs. Sarah may have simply liked the aesthetic appeal of the pattern, appreciating it as beautiful design element rather than supernatural symbol. The webs could be purely decorative choice based on contemporary fashion rather than spiritual meaning. The number 13 appears frequently throughout the house, though exactly how frequently depends on how deliberately one looks for it and how broadly one defines the pattern. 13 windows in some rooms. 13 panels in some doors and cabinets. 13 steps in certain staircases, though other staircases have different numbers of steps. 13 hooks in what's called the seance room. 13 bathrooms in the house, though this count may include some small water closets that barely qualify as bathrooms. 13 ceiling panels in some spaces. The pattern seems too consistent across too many different elements to be entirely coincidental or the result of later observers seeing patterns where none exist. But 13's significance remains genuinely unclear and open to interpretation. Was it intentional supernatural symbolism, with Sarah deliberately incorporating the number she believed had spiritual significance? Was it personal superstition, with Sarah avoiding or embracing the number based on beliefs about luck? Was it aesthetic preference, with Sarah simply liking how things looked when arranged in 13? Or is it selective observation by later interpreters who looked specifically for 13s and inevitably found them in a house with thousands of architectural elements? Sarah left no explanation for any design choices, including the recurring number 13. The pattern exists and is documentable. The meaning remains entirely speculative, with various interpreters offering different explanations that can't be verified or disproven. The house's quality and finish work varied considerably throughout the structure, ranging from genuinely impressive craftsmanship to utilitarian plainness. Some rooms featured expensive imported materials, elaborate craftsmanship, and fine details that demonstrated unlimited budget and skilled workers. Imported wood paneling from expensive tropical hardwoods. Art glass windows from Tiffany Studios in New York featuring elaborate designs. Hand-carved mantels for fireplaces. Inlaid parquet floors in intricate patterns. Gold and silver hardware on doors and windows. These rooms demonstrated that cost was absolutely no concern, and that highly skilled craftsmen were employed who took pride in their work and created genuinely beautiful spaces. Other areas were more utilitarian and plain, functional but without special decoration or expensive materials. Basic plaster walls, simple pine floors, plain doorways and windows. The inconsistency in finish quality suggests different purposes for different spaces, with public or important rooms receiving finest treatment while service areas and less important spaces remain basic. The variation might also reflect changing priorities over the decades of construction, with Sarah's standards or interests evolving over time. Sarah's daily life in the constantly expanding house remains somewhat mysterious and difficult to reconstruct from historical sources, as she was intensely private and shared little about her personal routine. She reportedly moved between different bedrooms, sleeping in a different room each night rather than maintaining one primary bedroom, though some historians question whether this happened regularly or was occasional practice. Whether this room changing was spiritual precaution meant to confuse spirits seeking her, security concern about being too predictable, personal preference for variety, physical necessity due to arthritis, making some rooms uncomfortable on certain days, or simply legend embellished in later retellings is unclear. The house was certainly large enough that such behavior would be possible with dozens of bedrooms available, but whether it actually happened regularly is unverified. Staff maintained the household and grounds, as operating a mansion of this size would have been impossible without significant help. Servants handled cooking, cleaning, laundry, and other domestic work necessary to maintain the enormous house. Groundskeepers managed the extensive gardens, orchards, and decorative landscape that surrounded the mansion. Sarah maintained the property as working farm in addition to the residential construction, growing fruit in extensive orchards and maintaining gardens that produced vegetables and flowers. The estate was largely self-sufficient in food production, with the orchards and gardens providing most of what the household needed. The staff would have numbered at least a dozen people and possibly considerably more, depending on the period and the current scope of construction work. Managing this staff and coordinating their work would have been a substantial undertaking in itself. Sarah's relationship with her staff appears to have been generally positive based on the limited evidence available, without any major scandals or conflicts emerging in public records or newspaper accounts. No scandals or exploitation allegations appeared in the press, which was always eager for stories about eccentric wealthy people. The staff remained relatively stable over the years, with some employees staying for extended periods, suggesting reasonable working conditions and fair treatment. In an era when servants' treatment varied enormously, and abuse was unfortunately not uncommon among wealthy employers, the lack of negative reports suggests at least adequate conditions and possibly genuine respect for employees as human beings rather than mere servants. The seance room, a small room with one entrance and multiple exits, features prominently in Winchester Mystery House legend and tour narratives. This room supposedly was where Sarah consulted spirits nightly, receiving instructions for the next day's construction from the dead. According to the legend, Sarah would enter through the one door, conduct her seance communing with spirits, then exit through one of the secret doors to confuse any evil spirits that might try to follow her. The room exists and matches descriptions given in tours. One visible entrance, 3 less obvious exits, 13 hooks on the wall. But whether Sarah actually held seances in this room regularly, occasionally, or at all, is entirely unverified by any contemporaneous source. The room's interpretation as seance room may be entirely creation of later tour guides and marketing rather than reflection of its actual historical use. Spiritualism was enormously popular in late 19th century America, reaching peak influence in the 1870s through 1890s. Communication with the dead through mediums and seances was widespread practice and socially acceptable, particularly among middle and upper classes. Many educated, intelligent people participated in spiritualist activities, attended seances, consulted mediums, and believed in possibility of communicating with deceased loved ones. The movement attracted millions of followers and was taken seriously by many prominent citizens. If Sarah consulted spirits or participated in spiritualist practices, she would have been far from unusual for her era and social class. Grief-stricken widows consulting mediums, hoping to contact dead husbands, was common enough to be almost expected. But if is the operative word, and definitive evidence is lacking. The spiritualist narrative surrounding Sarah is assumed but not proven by historical documentation. Sarah's privacy means we have remarkably little reliable information about her private practices, beliefs, or motivations. She may have held seances regularly. She may have consulted mediums occasionally without making it regular practice. She may have had no interest in spiritualism at all, despite the cultural popularity. We don't actually know, and claims to knowledge on this point go beyond available evidence. The seance room may genuinely have been a seance room where Sarah consulted spirits, or it may have been a small sitting room or study with an unusual layout that later interpreters labeled the seance room because it fit the legend. Despite the focus on the mansion, Sarah maintained other properties and interests beyond the San Jose construction project. She owned a houseboat on San Francisco Bay where she reportedly spent time, getting away from the construction site and enjoying the cooler bay climate during hot summer months. She traveled occasionally, though travel became less frequent as she aged and her mobility decreased. She visited Connecticut at least once after moving to California, maintaining some connection with family and friends from her earlier life. She managed her financial affairs competently and actively, making investments and business decisions that maintained and grew her already substantial wealth. This practical capability and business sense seems inconsistent with portrayals of Sarah as entirely consumed by spiritual obsession or mentally unstable. She functioned effectively in managing complex financial matters while simultaneously directing her construction project. Sarah was also involved in charitable work, donating to various causes and institutions throughout her life, showing awareness of the world beyond her mansion and desire to contribute positively. She supported Yale University with donations to various programs, maintaining connection to New Haven and her late husband's alma mater. She contributed to New Haven charities even after leaving Connecticut permanently, showing continued concern for the city she'd left. Most notably, she established a fund to support tuberculosis research, entirely understandable given that disease claimed her husband's life. She hoped her money might help find cure or better treatments that would prevent others from suffering the loss she'd experienced. These philanthropic activities demonstrate awareness beyond her immediate concerns and desire to use her wealth for purposes beyond building her house. This charitable dimension of Sarah's life receives little attention in popular accounts that focus on eccentricity and spirits. The construction continued year after year through the 1880s, 1890s, 1900s, and 1910s without any extended breaks or completion point. The house grew from 8 rooms to dozens, then over 100, then reportedly 160 by the time construction finally stopped. Wings extended in multiple directions from the original farmhouse core until the original structure was barely identifiable within the larger complex. Towers rose, though never again as high as before the 1906 earthquake. The structure became increasingly complex, maze-like, and difficult to navigate without someone who knew the layout. Visitors who managed to gain entry, which was rare given Sarah's intense desire for privacy, reported getting lost in the maze of hallways and rooms, unable to find their way back to familiar spaces without assistance. By the early 1900s, the Winchester Mystery House had become locally famous throughout the Santa Clara Valley and the Bay Area more broadly. San Jose residents knew about the widow and her endless construction project. The house was visible from some distances, a large Victorian structure unlike anything else in the agricultural valley. Stories circulated among locals about the strange building and its reclusive owner. Some stories were factual, based on actual observations or accounts from workers. Others were embellished, exaggerated, or simply invented, as tends to happen with any unusual situation. The legend was building along with the house, though the legend wouldn't fully crystallize into its current form until after Sarah's death when the property became tourist attraction. The 1906 earthquake represented the most significant disruption to construction during the entire 38-year building period. The damage was severe enough to require major reconstruction and modification, temporarily halting the forward progress of new construction while repairs were undertaken. The seven-story tower that collapsed had been a prominent feature visible from considerable distance, a landmark that locals used for navigation and reference. Its destruction changed the house's profile dramatically and apparently convinced Sarah that building too high was dangerous in earthquake-prone California. The house was never again built as tall as it had been before April 1906, with Sarah's ambitions becoming more horizontal than vertical after experiencing the earthquake's destructive power firsthand. Sarah's response to the earthquake damage is revealing about her character and commitment to the project. Rather than abandoning the property after such severe damage, moving elsewhere, or scaling back her construction dramatically, she adapted and continued. The damaged sections were addressed through combination of repair and modification. Construction continued with barely any pause once the immediate structural dangers were resolved. The earthquake was a significant setback, but not conclusion to the building project. Sarah's commitment to the house remained unchanged despite the dramatic demonstration of California's seismic dangers, suggesting the building served important psychological or emotional purpose beyond simply following spiritual instructions. Someone building only because spirits commanded it might have taken the earthquake as sign to stop. Sarah's determination to continue suggests deeper personal investment in the construction process itself. As Sarah aged through the 1900s and 1910s, her health declined gradually but noticeably. The arthritis that had troubled her for years worsened significantly, causing increasing pain and progressive mobility limitations. Walking became more difficult and painful. Climbing stairs, even the specially designed ones with minimal rises, became challenging. Her small stature and physical fragility became more pronounced with age. But despite physical decline, her mental faculties apparently remained sharp, and she continued supervising construction and making decisions about the ongoing work. She became more reclusive as she aged, though whether this was due to declining health, personal preference for solitude, or simply intensification of existing tendency toward privacy is unclear from available evidence. The construction continued through Sarah's 70s and into her 80s, though possibly at reduced pace as her ability to actively supervise diminished with age and declining health. Workers still arrived daily. Hammers and saws still sounded across the property. New elements were still added, existing features still modified. The building that had occupied most of Sarah's adult life continued right up until the end of that life. She remained in the house she had spent decades building, surrounded by the architectural maze that had become her life's work and perhaps her refuge from grief and loss. On September 5, 1922, Sarah Winchester died peacefully in her sleep. She was 83 years old and had spent 38 years, almost half her entire life, building her extraordinary house. The construction that had continued for nearly 4 decades stopped immediately and permanently with her death. The workers gathered their tools and departed. The house stood silent for the first time in 38 years, no longer echoing with sounds of construction. The hammering and sawing that had been constant presence simply stopped. The house was incomplete by any conventional measure, but completion had never been the goal. The building had been process, not pursuit of finished product. Sarah's will, prepared in advance and filed with proper legal authorities, left most of her considerable estate to family members and charitable causes she had supported during her life. Her niece, Frances Marriott, received the bulk of the estate, including substantial financial assets. The house and its contents were to be sold, with proceeds going to her niece and other beneficiaries. The will contained no explanation for the construction, no revelation of purpose, no discussion of spirits or curses, no insight into her motivations. Sarah took her reasons to the grave, maintaining her privacy even in death and leaving only the physical evidence of the house itself as testimony to whatever had driven her. The house's contents were auctioned off over several weeks in late 1922, a massive sale that attracted dealers and curiosity seekers from throughout California. Furniture accumulated over decades was sold piece by piece. Art, household goods, clothing, personal items, all were dispersed to various buyers. The sale was practical necessity to settle the estate, but it also stripped the house of context. The rooms Sarah had lived in and furnished according to her preferences were emptied completely. The Winchester Mystery House was emptied of Sarah's possessions, leaving only the architectural shell and the strange design elements that would become focus of tourist attention. The emptied mansion was even more peculiar without furnishings to provide context or purpose to the strange rooms and architectural impossibilities. The property was purchased by a group of investors who recognized its potential as tourist attraction, even if it was unsuitable as normal residence. The house was too odd, too impractical, too expensive to maintain as private home. But as attraction, as curiosity, as destination for people interested in the unusual and mysterious, it had obvious commercial appeal. The investors understood they were buying not just property, but story, legend, and unique destination unlike anything else available to tourists in California or anywhere else. The Winchester Mystery House opened to public tours in 1923, less than a year after Sarah's death. The transition from private residence to tourist attraction was remarkably quick, driven by commercial opportunity and public curiosity about the mysterious mansion and its eccentric builder. The early tours emphasized the house's oddities and Sarah's supposed eccentricity, presenting the architectural impossibilities and telling stories about the reclusive widow who had built them. The spiritualist narrative provided compelling story for tour guides to tell, much more dramatic and marketable than alternative explanations. The widow building to appease spirits of those killed by Winchester rifles made better narrative than wealthy woman with architectural hobby or grief-stricken mother coping with loss through building project. The legend was actively shaped, refined, polished, and repeated until it became accepted history in popular understanding. Tour guides developed standard narratives explaining the house's features in terms of spiritual instructions and attempts to confuse ghosts. The story of the Boston medium and the curse became central element of the standard tour. The architectural oddities were interpreted as evidence of spiritual guidance rather than earthquake damage, experimentation, or simple construction evolution. Each retelling reinforced the legend, and the legend became increasingly divorced from documentable historical fact. Harry Houdini, the famous magician and escape artist who had become prominent skeptic of spiritualism and enemy of fraudulent mediums, visited the Winchester Mystery House in 1924 during his campaign against spiritualist con artists. Houdini had lost his beloved mother and been devastated when mediums claimed to contact her, eventually realizing they were frauds exploiting his grief. He dedicated years to exposing spiritualist fraud and educating public about mediums' tricks. His visit to the Winchester House was part of this larger mission. He toured the house, examined the oddities, spoke with people who had known Sarah, and researched the claims about her spiritualist motivations. Houdini's conclusion was characteristically blunt. The spiritualist explanation was overblown and unsupported by evidence. His opinion was that Sarah was eccentric, but not necessarily spiritually motivated, that the oddities had more mundane explanations, and that the legend was primarily a marketing tool for the tourist attraction. Houdini's skepticism, however, didn't prevent the legend from growing and becoming more entrenched in popular consciousness. The Winchester Mystery House became increasingly famous as a tourist attraction through the decades following Sarah's death, eventually becoming more famous as a tourist site than it had been during Sarah's lifetime as private residence. The house attracted visitors from across the country and internationally, drawn by stories of the haunted mansion and its mysterious builder. The oddities were cataloged systematically for tour purposes, with each strange feature given explanation in terms of spiritual guidance or ghost-confusing design. The legend was embellished with each retelling, with details becoming firmer and more specific, even when source material was vague or non-existent. The story Sarah never told publicly was told for her by tour guides who shaped narrative to maximize tourist appeal and commercial success. The Depression years of the 1930s were challenging for tourism industry generally, with economic hardship, reducing discretionary spending, and travel. But the Winchester Mystery House survived financially. Its unique nature and relatively modest admission price keeping visitors coming even during economic crisis. World War II brought resource rationing, gas restrictions, and travel limitations that reduced visitors significantly during the early 1940s, but the attraction persevered through the war years. Post-war prosperity and the rise of automobile tourism brought renewed boom in visitors during the late 1940s and 1950s. The Winchester Mystery House was firmly established as major California attraction and American curiosity, a must-see destination for tourists visiting the San Francisco Bay Area. Over decades following Sarah's death, the spiritualist narrative became increasingly fixed and resistant to questioning or alternative interpretation. Sarah became, in popular imagination, the widow driven mad by guilt over deaths caused by Winchester rifles, building endlessly to confuse vengeful spirits, consulting the dead nightly for construction instructions in the seance room. This dramatic narrative appears in countless books, magazine articles, television shows, documentaries, and films about haunted places or American mysteries. The story is repeated so frequently across so many media that it's widely accepted as established historical fact, rather than legend, with questionable evidentiary basis. But examining the evidence critically and carefully reveals significant problems with the standard spiritualist narrative. The medium consultation story, central to explaining Sarah's behavior, can't be verified through contemporaneous sources and appears relatively late in historical record. The earliest detailed versions seem to emerge in the 1920s and 1930s after Sarah's death, when the house was being marketed as tourist attraction and dramatic origin story had obvious commercial value. Sarah's surviving letters and business correspondence, limited though they are, show competent, rational woman managing complex affairs effectively, making sound investments, and conducting business successfully. The construction, while unconventional in process, employed legitimately skilled workers and produced quality work in many areas, suggesting serious architectural interest rather than mad compulsion. The oddities, examined individually, often have potential explanations beyond spiritual instruction, including earthquake damage, experimentation, changing plans, and incorporation of mistakes. Alternative explanations for Sarah's behavior are possible and in some ways more probable than spiritual compulsion, though they're less dramatic and therefore less popular in tourist narratives. A wealthy widow dealing with profound grief over losing her only child and her husband might find purpose in distraction and long-term project that provided daily focus and ongoing goals. Building and design could represent genuine interest and hobby, particularly for someone with mechanical aptitude demonstrated by her patents. Someone with unlimited financial resources and architectural curiosity could experiment freely without concern for cost or practicality. Employing workers continuously for decades provided them with stable income unusual in construction trades, possibly representing social responsibility and desire to help working families. Physical activity involved in walking the property and supervising construction might help manage arthritis symptoms by keeping joints mobile. Perhaps Sarah simply enjoyed building, found it intellectually engaging and emotionally satisfying, and could afford to indulge that interest indefinitely without financial constraint. These explanations lack spiritual drama, but fit available evidence equally well or better than ghost stories. Sarah's patents suggest genuine mechanical aptitude and interest in solving practical problems through innovation. She wasn't just wealthy, eccentric commissioning construction, but someone capable of understanding mechanical principles and developing improvements to existing technology. The window lock patent demonstrates she thought seriously about practical problems and worked to develop better solutions. Her business management, maintaining and growing her wealth through decades of heavy construction spending, demonstrates rational capability and sound judgment. Her documented philanthropy shows awareness beyond her immediate concerns and desire to contribute to causes she considered worthwhile, including medical research that might prevent others from experiencing the loss she'd suffered. These aspects of Sarah's life complicate simple narrative of madness, spiritual obsession, or complete withdrawal from reality. The truth about Sarah Winchester's motivations is probably complex, multifaceted, and ultimately unknowable with certainty given her privacy and lack of explanatory documents. Sarah likely grieved deeply for her lost child and husband, grief that never fully healed. She may have found some comfort in spiritualism, which was popular and socially acceptable in her era, without necessarily being consumed by it. She clearly had genuine interest in architecture, building, and design that went beyond simply having a house constructed. She possessed financial resources to pursue interest without constraint from cost or others' opinions. She valued privacy intensely and successfully avoided public attention throughout her decades in California. All these elements together might explain her choices better than any single dramatic narrative of spiritual compulsion or mental illness. The reality was probably complicated, involving multiple motivations and influences that evolved over 38 years of building. The Winchester Mystery House stands today as museum and major tourist attraction, one of California's most visited historical sites. Carefully designed tours guide visitors through selected rooms and hallways, showcasing the architectural oddities. The strange features are displayed and explained, usually in terms of the spiritualist legend. The story of Sarah and the spirits is recounted by knowledgeable guides who have told it thousands of times. Hundreds of thousands of visitors explore the mansion annually, drawn by stories of America's most haunted house and its mysterious builder, making it a significant economic asset for San Jose, an important part of the region's tourist industry. The house has been expanded and modified to some degree since Sarah's death, though primarily for tourist accommodation and safety rather than architectural experimentation, continuing her tradition. Visitor pathways have been established through the maze-like structure, with routes designed to showcase the most interesting and strange features. Safety features have been added to protect visitors, including railings, lighting, and barriers preventing access to dangerous areas. Some areas that Sarah kept private have been made accessible to tours, while other sections remain closed either for preservation or because they're too fragile or dangerous for public access. The structure is maintained professionally and preserved as historical site, though it's now primarily tourist attraction rather than residence, with commercial rather than residential purpose driving preservation decisions. Estimates of the house's size vary depending on how spaces are counted and what qualifies as room versus hallway or storage. The most commonly cited figure is 160 rooms, though exact count depends on definitions and what survives versus what has been modified. Some spaces are clearly rooms designed for specific purposes. Others are closets, alcoves, passages, or undefined spaces that may or may not qualify as rooms depending on criteria used. 47 fireplaces is more concrete and countable. 10,000 windows is frequently cited figure that likely includes small ventilation windows, decorative glass panels, and interior windows in addition to standard exterior windows. The numbers themselves have become part of the legend, repeated and amplified until they take on almost mythic quality regardless of precise accuracy. The house's construction cost is estimated at approximately $5.5 million spread over 38 years of continuous building, equivalent to well over $100 million in current money when adjusted for inflation. The amount represents sustained, substantial construction employing multiple skilled workers continuously for decades. The expense was enormous by any measure, though though easily affordable given Sarah's daily income from Winchester Company holdings. The construction spending still left Sarah wealthy at her death, demonstrating the extraordinary scale of the Winchester fortune. Modern historical assessment of Sarah Winchester has become somewhat more nuanced and balanced in recent years, though popular culture still largely embraces the spiritualist narrative. Recent scholarship examines her as complex individual rather than simple eccentric or spiritual obsessive defined entirely by grief and supernatural beliefs. Her intelligence, demonstrated in her education and language abilities, is acknowledged. Her business capability in managing substantial wealth is recognized. Her genuine interest in building and design, evidenced by her patents and the quality of much of the construction, is taken seriously. The legend is questioned more carefully and examined critically against available evidence. The result is more complicated and less dramatically simple portrait, but probably closer to historical reality than ghost-focused narratives. Academic historians tend towards skepticism about supernatural explanations, while popular media continues favoring dramatic spiritualist interpretation. The house itself, regardless of ultimate truth about why it was built, stands as a remarkable achievement worthy of attention. The craftsmanship, in many areas, is genuinely excellent, demonstrating skilled workers and serious attention to quality. The scale is impressive by any standard, representing decades of sustained effort and enormous resources. The oddities, whatever their ultimate cause, are genuinely peculiar and fascinating to observe and experience. As architectural curiosity, the Winchester Mystery House deserves its fame and continued interest. The structure is genuinely unique, and uniqueness has value in itself, regardless of motivation behind it. There is no other building quite like it anywhere in the world. The ghost stories persist and probably always will, becoming a self-perpetuating element of the house's identity. The Winchester Mystery House actively markets itself as haunted location, with special nighttime tours emphasizing supernatural elements and encouraging ghost encounter expectations. Ghost hunting groups regularly investigate the property with electromagnetic field detectors, infrared cameras, and other paranormal investigation equipment. Visitors frequently report experiences they interpret as supernatural, from cold spots to unexplained sounds to feelings of presence. Whether these reflect actual paranormal activity, combination of suggestion and atmospheric architecture, natural phenomena misinterpreted through supernatural lens, or simple imagination, is matter of personal belief rather than verifiable evidence. The house's reputation as haunted ensures the ghost stories continue and evolve with new generations of visitors. The legend of Sarah Winchester as spiritualist building endlessly to appease the dead is deeply embedded in American popular culture and shows no signs of fading. The story appears in countless retellings across all media. It's taught to school children learning about California history. It's referenced in television shows, movies, novels, and popular media of all types. The narrative has achieved cultural permanence and independent existence beyond the physical house, becoming American legend that will likely persist even as historical scholarship questions its factual basis. The story is simply too good, too dramatic, too memorable to be displaced by more nuanced but less exciting historical interpretation. What can be stated with confidence based on documented evidence is this: Sarah Winchester was a wealthy widow who experienced devastating personal losses that profoundly affected her life trajectory. She moved to California and purchased property in San Jose in the mid-1880s. She commissioned continuous construction on that property that lasted 38 years without any clear plan for completion and created one of America's most unusual structures. The house contains numerous architectural oddities ranging from fascinating to genuinely bizarre. Sarah was intensely private throughout her California years and left no clear explanation for her choices in letters, diaries, or interviews. She managed her considerable financial affairs competently, made sound business decisions, and engaged in charitable giving throughout her life. She lived to 83 years old. She died in 1922, and construction immediately stopped with her death. These facts are documented and beyond reasonable dispute. The motivations behind the construction remain subject to interpretation and genuine uncertainty despite confident assertions in popular accounts. Spiritual guidance following medium consultation is possible, but unproven and poorly documented. Grief coping mechanism and search for purpose after devastating losses is psychologically plausible. Genuine architectural interest and experimentation is reasonable, given her patents and the seriousness of much of the work. Social responsibility in providing steady employment is consistent with her treatment of workers. Combination of multiple factors evolving over nearly 4 decades is most probable. Definitive answer is unavailable because Sarah deliberately maintained privacy, and those who might have known her thinking are dead over a century. The absence of explanation is itself part of the story. The Winchester Mystery House represents a fascinating intersection of wealth, loss, eccentricity, and enduring mystery that continues captivating people over a century after construction ended. It stands as physical monument to one woman's unprecedented construction project that consumed nearly 4 decades of her life. It generates questions that can't be answered conclusively despite researchers' best efforts. It fascinates precisely because it's genuinely strange, and because the strangeness lacks clear, unambiguous explanation that would resolve the mystery definitively. The house Sarah built has outlived her by over a century and will likely stand for many more years, preserved and maintained as historical site and tourist destination. It serves simultaneously as museum, attraction, business enterprise, and reminder that people's motivations can be complex and opaque even when their actions are highly visible. We can document in detail what Sarah built. We can measure and catalog the oddities. We can photograph and tour every accessible room, but we can't know with certainty why she built it, and that uncertainty is central to what makes the Winchester Mystery House enduringly fascinating across generations. For visitors who walk through the maze of hallways and climb the staircases to nowhere, the experience is genuinely surreal and disorienting. The house actively violates normal expectations about how buildings should be organized and how spaces should relate to each other. The accumulated oddities create atmosphere of strangeness and disorientation that would be difficult to achieve deliberately. Whether one believes the spiritual legends, prefers rational explanations, or remains agnostic about motivations, the physical reality of the house is undeniably peculiar and unlike any other residential structure in America. The Winchester Mystery House is monument to the reality that we can't always know why people do what they do, especially when those people value privacy and leave no explanatory documents. Sarah Winchester left a massive, inexplicable structure and no explanation for it. Historians and biographers can speculate intelligently, can offer plausible theories, can examine available evidence carefully, but ultimately can't know her mind or her motivations with certainty. The uncertainty bothers some observers and fascinates others. The not knowing is an integral part of the story and contributes to continued interest and speculation. If you found this exploration of the Winchester Mystery House and Sarah Winchester's story valuable, please consider subscribing for more documentaries about American architectural mysteries, Gilded Age history, and fascinating historical subjects. The house stands today, welcoming visitors, generating questions, and preserving mysteries that may never be fully solved. Sarah Winchester built something unprecedented, and more than a century after her death, we're still trying to understand why. Thank you for watching.